Hey everybody. So, if you've seen my top 10 favorite films of the 1970s and the 1980s, well, you were probably seeing this coming. This is my top 10 favorite films of the 1990s. Another reason why I wanted to do the 1990s, not only because I do the 70s and 80s, but that's also the year, I was born in 1990. So this decade's kind of special to me because, it was the decade where it kind of I was kind of introduced to film in this decade, so it kind of has a special place in my heart because of that. One of these films on this list definitely is on the list because it is one of my biggest film experiences that kind of got me into this art form in general. Um, but yeah, I grew up with these films. I remember when they came out. Unlike the 70s and 80s, this is the first decade that I'll talk about here where I was actually around when these films came out. Some of these obviously I was maybe a little bit too young to maybe recognize or remember the hype and the talk about them because my age group wasn't, the target audience for that time. But some of these I do remember. Some of these, in fact, I remember seeing in the theater or remember seeing on VHS tape during the 90s. So some of these have a very close place in my heart. So let's get going. At number 10, we have The Sixth Sense. Obviously, I was a little too young when this one came out. I was about 9 years old. But I do remember everybody talking about it. I remember, and obviously, when I got around to seeing it in my teen years, obviously, I ended up loving it like everybody else did as well. This is the first film, I think, where M. Night Shyamalan really got onto the map. People really started to recognize how big of a filmmaker he was going to be until recently, unfortunately, with Last Airbender and After Earth. That was kind of his downfall. But Sixth Sense, for sure, that was in the hype of his career. He made Unbreakable and Signs shortly afterward. But Sixth Sense is definitely one of my all-time favorite films from him. And I think it's the favorite film of everybody else's for that filmmaker as well. Just the twist ending is brilliant. It's just very brilliantly executed. It's one of those rare films too where you almost like it the more you watch it, simply because you can look at all the small things that happen throughout it. Because you know the ending now, you can spot those little small things that happen throughout the movie. Just a really well-made movie, and it's definitely on my list for a reason. So it makes it at number 10. At number 9, we have The Silence of the Lambs. So, of course, I was very young at the time. Definitely, I would probably be, scarred for life if I saw this one as a kid. But 1991 was, Silence of the Lambs. Um, One Best Picture, that's basically the only kind of hype or, big thing about that movie that I can probably say I remember. I think I saw it at the library every once in a while. I remember the picture of Jodie Foster with the butterfly on her mouth, and but that was probably as far as I was able to look at it back in the day. So obviously this is something I saw in my adult years and realized how good it was for the early '90s. Yeah, just it really shows just how. This is probably one of the first times I can probably ever say this safely. It's truly the first, I think probably the first and only film where I like it because it just shows how sick and disgusting our society is. And that's probably the only really good film I can probably say that about, and where it's a good thing. Because this film is based off Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer and people who really did some really awful things. And the film, I think, really depicts just how um, deep these things can get, just how psychologically, with Jodie Foster actually going to Buffalo Bill's place and recruiting the girl and getting rid of Buffalo Bill and things of that nature, and Hannibal Lecter knowing everything you're thinking about while you're talking to him, and the fact that he's behind bars and yet he's still just as threatening as he would be if he was not in the jail. And there's so many brilliant things about this movie. It definitely makes it at number 9. There's a lot of things in that movie where if you really think about it, it's even creepier when you think about it, even while you're watching it. So it's just there's so many brilliant things about it. So it makes it at number 9. At number 8, we have Pulp Fiction. Quentin Tarantino's big second film because he did Reservoir Dogs before this one. I personally think Pulp Fiction's his best film. It's definitely the film that got me into Quentin Tarantino. Um, I think it's his best flowing movie. I think it flows the best out of all the films he's made. We had a huge cast in this one, so that definitely helped. I loved the fact that he was kind of making this crime pulp novel type story or stories, since there's multiple stories in this movie. It's just so brilliantly well done, kind of like what Roger Ebert said about it. You can almost listen to it as an audiobook just because the dialogue is just so brilliantly written, and that you can like listen to it in the radio on your car, and just a really brilliant film. And it's one of those films where the more you watch it, the more you can really appreciate it, just because there's just so much brilliance and hard work that went into it, and it really just shows what Quentin Tarantino offers as a filmmaker. So it makes it in at number 8. At number 7, this is one that I watched all the time when I was a kid, and I still watch it, specifically now with Christmas time coming around here soon. Is Home Alone. I'm a huge John Hughes fan. He wrote and produced the movie. Chris Columbus, who later did the first 2 Harry Potter films, and Mrs. Doubtfire, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. Um, he did, and surprisingly, Mrs. Doubtfire didn't make it on the list, but you'll see here. This list is more about, kind of why I think about the 90s, what the 90s means to me, big films that came out in this decade that really mean a lot to me. But Mrs. Doubtfire, as far as like films that I think are the all time greatest, yeah, for sure, that one's on the list. But going back to Home Alone, it makes it at number 7, like I said. Came out in 1990, so I was actually born the year this movie came out. Um, and it's just such a really great movie. It's really, I think the film really focuses both on a comedic and almost kind of a scary level of what it could be like to be home alone when no one from your family's around. And John Hughes and Chris Columbus really had a lot of fun with this kid really kind of taking over the house and really showing these burglars that they have no reason to be there. Just a lot of fun. I watch it almost every year. It makes it at number 7. Number 6 is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Anybody in the 90s who was around at the time would probably tell you it was probably the biggest budget, most successful summer blockbuster that came out in that decade. Really huge film, and obviously when I saw it in my later years, I really appreciated just how big and how epic this film still is to this day. I do think it's one of James Cameron's best films he's ever done. It's brilliant story wise, it's brilliant action wise, it's brilliant dialogue wise, it's brilliant CGI wise. It's just James Cameron really knows how to make a good movie, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day really represents what he has to bring to the table as a film director, and that's why I think I really like it and why I think it's a very notable 90s movie. It makes it at number 6. At number 5, we have Toy Story. Now, this film is very, very close to my heart. I remember seeing this in the theater when I was a little boy. I've seen all 3 Toy Story films in theaters. Um, I was even in the right age at the right time when Toy Story 3 came out with Andy going off to college, so it was perfect. I was actually in college already, but just the fact that Andy was going off to college, I could really connect with. Um, yeah, the original Toy Story, it was very revolutionary. It was the first completely computer animated film. Nobody saw animation like that at the time. And there was a lot of short films by Pixar already, but they weren't very mainstream. Not a lot of people saw them at the time. But this is the first film where people started to realize, this computer animation thing can really, really revolutionize how films get made, and it really did. I mean, look at all the CGI animated films we get nowadays. It's just such a brilliant film. It's so brilliantly written. It was one of Josh Whedon's, I think, one of the earlier stories he wrote in his career. That kind of boosted, I bet, like him allowing him to do Serenity and the Avengers and things of that nature. Um, just a really brilliant film. It just really, I can really connect to this film because when I was younger, ever since I saw that film, I almost started to think to myself, what would my toys be doing if I was gone? Who would be friends with who would be enemies with who? If I got a new toy, would the other toys not like that new toy? And so it kind of got my imagination up and going as a kid ever since I saw it. So Toy Story makes it at number 5. At number 4, we have Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. I think this is a very underrated biopic. I think it's one of the best biopics ever made. Jason Scott Lee was perfect as Bruce Lee. I love what I really like about this movie is not only is it a biopic, it's made as a Bruce Lee action picture, and I really appreciate Rob Cohen, I believe his name is Rob Cohen, who did the first Fast and Furious film, for approaching it that way because I think it's a perfect way to tell Bruce Lee's life. It shows the man, the martial artist, the philosopher, the mentor, the teacher of Bruce Lee, the father, the husband. Everything about Bruce Lee's life was perfectly depicted in that movie. Shame on those who really don't like it because I really think it's a really brilliant film. It makes it in at number 4. At number 3, we have The Shawshank Redemption. This is not only one of the best films of the 90s, this is probably one of the best films ever made. IMDb has it very high on their list of the best films ever made, and for a good reason. Frank Darabont is a huge director. He's currently writing the Godzilla reboot right now, which I have a lot of hope for. Um, Shawshank Redemption, guys, it's just such a brilliant film. it really just shows how brutal prison can be, but it also really shows, friendship and closeness and, us connecting with other people. And there's just so many, it's such a brilliantly written film. Morgan Freeman puts so much heart into the character he played. And it's just one of those films where everything about it is great. Whether it's a brutal scene or a dramatic scene or a funny scene or a happy scene or a sad scene, it just every time it's trying to do what it's trying to do, it does it perfectly. It makes it in at number three. At number two, we have The Lion King. This is one of the first films I ever saw, and it's probably the reason why it's so high on the list. This film got me into film. I just love this movie. I remember, even to this day, I remember watching that opening shot with the sun coming out of the ground. It was that red sky. Really brilliant film. James Earl Jones is the voice of Mufasa. I mean, you couldn't have gotten a better actor to voice that character. Um, Jeremy Irons, that voice of Scar still haunts me to this day. Every time I hear Jeremy Irons talk in a movie, I think of Scar from Lion King. It's just a brilliant, fun, scary, dramatic, and everything that you can love about the movies is in The Lion King. I bet there's at least one scene that represents each genre from a certain movie. Lion King makes it at number two. It's a really brilliant film. At number one, a lot of people saw this coming. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's from the '90s. And it actually outbeat a lot of really good films that came out in '94. Is Forrest Gump. I When I think of the '90s, I think about Forrest Gump. That's the first film that comes to mind. I remember even as a little kid, I was obviously too young to see it when it first came out, but when I finally did get to see it, I'd say maybe like 9 or 10. I was probably 9 or 10 by the time I finally saw it. Um, it was just so brilliant. I mean, it's just everything about the movies that we love is in Forrest Gump. It's sad, it's funny, it's happy, it's dramatic, it's action packed, it's thrilling, it's really inspiring. It just really makes you want to get out and do something very motivating for other people. It's just such a really, it just moves you in every way. And every time I watch it, I just love the musical score also. Every time I watch it, it's just such a work of brilliance. I mean, it definitely is easily, without a doubt, Robert Zemeckis' best film, and that's saying a lot because I really like Back to the Future also, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit's a pretty big one for me as well. Everything I could love about a movie is in Forrest Gump. It has everything I want. So that's my top 10, you guys. Very important decade to me. Like I said, I grew up in this decade. So a lot of these films I remember. Some of these I remember kind of the, people raving about them. And some of these I didn't, but I got to see them in my adult years or my teen years, and I got to see just how brilliant those other films were. So, what are your top 10 films of the 1990s? List them down below. Hope you guys like this list, and I hope to see you here for the next video.